reducing the size of the working class, the dispersion of its forces. The declassing of some of the workers was the most serious consequence of economic disruption. On the basis of hunger and fatigue, a part of the workers left production. Many went to the village, engaged in handicrafts, dressing of lighters, bagging. Thus the working class was dispersed, part of the workers declassed. The class base of the dictatorship of the proletariat began to weaken. History of the CPSU, B. Short Course, p. 238. The state of industrial production was strongly affected by the wrecking and sabotage of senior employees and part of the technical staff. In the coal and metallurgical industries of the Urals and southern Russia, White Guard rulers and interventionists inflicted enormous damage on production. For example, at the Motoverlika factory carrying out military assignments, all the nutrient parts of steam boiler pumps were removed by the White Guards. Belts, measuring instruments and tools, automatic regulators of both steam turbines of the electric shop, and also some special machines were taken away. To start up the plant, the workers had to start by repairing the damage. New missing parts were manufactured by selecting and adapting old, used ones. The workers started up the power stations on the second day after the departure of the Whites. The steam turbine was started after 10 days, replacing the automatic devices with a worker who adjusted the number of revolutions by hand. But the plant could not work at full capacity. As of June 1, 1917, the factory had 19,566 workers and employees. By the time of liberation from Whites, the factory had only 5,892 employees. Until the end of 1919, the number of workers at the plant increased to 7,042 people. The Kharkov locomotive plant, White Guards, was brought to a state of complete frustration. Denikin's authorities exported everything possible from the factory. The coal was transported to the last pud. The Lugansk plant was also disorganized. Not enough 30% of workers. The technicians ran along with the Whites. 33 people left, including 9 department heads, assistant managers, responsible designers, head of the technical bureau. The plant experienced a severe crisis. The heroic efforts of the working class were necessary in order, under these conditions, to cope with economic and political tasks, to ensure the victorious conclusion of the war against foreign interventionists and the bourgeois landlord White Guard armies. The selfless heroism of the Red Army soldiers on the fronts, the workers in the factories and factories in the rear, the support of the Soviet government by millions of poor and middle peasant masses overcame the sabotage and resistance of the enemies of the revolution. After the devastating imperialist, and then civil war, in the conditions of devastation, hunger and disease from malnutrition, the great party of Lenin and Stalin managed to inspire millions of people to heroic deeds. The most vivid example of labor enthusiasm shown by party and non-partisan Bolsheviks during this period were communist Suputniks. In all cases, when the danger directly threatened the existence of the Soviet Republic, the party threw detachments of the best proletarian communists into critical sections and achieved decisive successes. Thus, the heroic struggle devoted to the cause of the liberation of the working people opened a new source of strength and the advantages of socialism over capitalism. Pointing out that the dictatorship of the proletariat is not only violence against the exploiters, Lenin taught, the economic basis of this revolutionary violence, the guarantee of its vitality and success is that the proletariat represents and carries out a higher type of social organization of labor, in comparison with capitalism. This is the essence. This is the source of strength and the guarantee of the inevitable complete victory of communism. Lenin, Collected Works, Volume XXIV, p. 336. The historical example of railroad workers of the Moscow Kazan Railway showed on a concrete matter what the vanguard role of communists in production should be. This great initiative, according to Lenin's definition, carried away revolutionary work in a non-party mass of the workers of hundreds and thousands of enterprises throughout the Soviet Republic. It began with the fact that the communists and sympathizing workers of the Moscow Kazan Railway adopted a resolution on work in the military, sparing no effort and health for the sake of victory over the counter-revolution. They decided to conduct communist Subotniks, work out weekly on Saturdays for 5 hours free of charge, until the complete victory over Kolchak. The first Saturday, May 10, 1919, a landmark date in the history of socialism. Lenin considered this initiative to be the greatest victory, having a great historical significance. He wrote, "This is the beginning of a coup, more difficult, more substantial, more radical, more decisive than the overthrow of the bourgeoisie, for it is a victory over one's own stagnancy, licentiousness, petty bourgeois egoism, over these habits that accursed capitalism left to the worker and peasant. When this victory is secured, then and only then a new social discipline, socialist discipline, will be created. Then and only then a return to capitalism will become impossible, communism will become truly invincible." IBID, p. 329. The overwhelming majority of the workers who came out on the first communist Subotnik were nonpartisan workers, fascinated by the heroic example of the Bolsheviks. The first communist Subotnik caused a response in other enterprises, on the railways, at power stations, and the productivity of work at Subotniks was 2 to 3 times higher than usual. Subotniks showed what inexhaustible opportunities for raising labor productivity lurk among the people under the dictatorship of the working class. Lenin cites the following figures on labor productivity on the Subotnik-Alexandrovsky Railway. The productivity of the work of turners is 213%, of unskilled workers, 300% against the usual rate. In Ver, on the first communist Subotnik on May 31, the growth of labor productivity was 13 times higher than the average rate. Lenin attached particular importance to the communist Sabbath keeping. The advanced workers in the most difficult conditions increased labor productivity, selflessly overcoming difficulties and caring about increasing the wealth of the Soviet Republic. Lenin saw in the growth of the productivity of labor of the Soviet workers the guarantee of the final victory of socialism over capitalism. He wrote, "Labor productivity, in the last analysis, is the most important thing for the victory of the new social system. Capitalism created labor productivity, unprecedented in serfdom. Capitalism can be finally defeated and will be finally defeated by the fact that socialism creates a new, much higher labor productivity. It's a very difficult and very long business, but it's started, that's the main thing." If in a hungry Moscow in the summer of 1919 hungry workers who survived the hard 4 years of the imperialist war, and then a year and a half of an even more severe civil war, could start this great cause, then what will be the future development when we win the civil war and conquer the world? Communism is the highest, against capitalist, labor productivity of voluntary, conscious, united, using advanced technology, workers. Communist Subotniks are unusually valuable, as the actual beginning of communism, and this is an enormous rarity, for we are at a stage where only the first steps are made to transition from capitalism to communism, as it is said, quite rightly, in our party program, p. 342. Lenin attached special importance to measures aimed at raising labor productivity and increasing output, a premium wage system, a bonus for the best performance of the task. The 9th Congress of the Party, in its resolution on the immediate tasks of economic construction, noted indisputable signs of a labor advance in the advanced strata of the working people. At the same time, the Congress in a Bolshevik way warned the party, central and local Soviet institutions of an exaggerated assessment of the results achieved. The Congress urged the party to direct all the forces of the country to the upbringing of the socialist discipline of labor, to organizing the labor upsurge of the masses, The Congress pointed to the need to widely popularize the scientific and technical knowledge, professional education of all types and classes, organize courses for the training of instructors and commissioners of labor, the publication of textbooks, manuals, cinematographic tapes, etc. For the same purposes, the resolution reads, all scientific forces should be called upon to develop the problems of engineering and the scientific organization of industry, and institutions must be created and fully supported for scientific research and inventions. VKP, B. In resolutions NEA Congresses, Conferences and Plenum CC HI, p. 337. The organization of labor and forms of remuneration must be built in such a way as to stimulate labor upsurge, overall productivity growth in factories, transport, and so on. And we must remember that the production propaganda, which we have decided to carry out firmly, is joined by another way of influencing another kind. It is a reward in kind. It's not enough to say it to the peasants and workers. Strain labor discipline. We must also help them. We must reward those who, after immeasurable calamities, continue to display heroism on the labor front. Lenin, Collected Works, Volume XXVI, pages 40-41. In his speech on the trade unions, December 30, 1920, Lenin said, "Here is the production role and task of trade unions, the production of premiums in kind. Prizes should be given in such a way, to reward someone who showed heroism, diligence, talent and devotion to the business executive, for shock work, shock supply. This shock is needed. We will carefully study the practical experience of our application of shockness." IBID, p. 72-73. Already in the years of the Civil War, all the enemies of Bolshevism took up arms against the Leninist policy of payment for work. Trotsky in 1920 put forward the thesis of shock in production and equalization in consumption. Lenin exposed and defeated this enemy thesis. Striking is a preference. Preference in production requires a preference for consumption, Lenin pointed out. The party enforced Lenin's instructions. The premium system was particularly widely used in transport, in enterprises working under the orders of the Red Army, in institutions. The party fought for the creation of strong iron discipline in production in all areas of the national economy. The most characteristic examples of the Bolshevik style of leadership in this area are the decisions of the Ninth Congress on labor armies, the struggle against labor desertion, the organization of Suputniks, and exemplary enterprises. The creation of labor armies, as formulated by the Ninth Congress of the party, pursued practical economic and socialist goals and was of a temporary nature, for the labor armies could only be used on a simple, accessible to all Red Army men's work. The use of large armies on the economic labor front with the preservation of the headquarters of the formations was expedient insofar as it was necessary to preserve the army, i.e., since the war was not yet over and there was a danger of an attack on the Soviet Republic. The Ninth Congress of the party adopted a resolution on combating labor desertion. The Congress pointed out that workers who leave their enterprises on their own and move in search of better supply conditions or for speculation, worsen the general position of the working class and impede economic construction. Therefore, the Congress advanced a persistent, systematic and severe struggle against labor desertion as the most important task of the Soviet government and trade unions. In the short course of the history of the CPSU, a characterization of the period of a brief respite is given. This was the time after the defeat of Kolchak and Denikin at the end of 1919. But the interventionists were not yet completely expelled from the borders of our homeland, from the Far East, Transcaucasia and Crimea. There was a danger of an attack by the imperialists on the part of Poland. During the Civil War, many skilled workers left production, due to the closure of factories. The skilled workers have now returned to production for work in this specialty. Several thousand communists were sent to restore transport, the situation of which was difficult. Without restoring transport, it was impossible to take up seriously the restoration of the main industries. Food work has been strengthened and improved. The Russian electrification plan was initiated. Under the gun were up to 5 million Red Army men, who could not yet be disbanded because of military danger. Therefore, some parts of the Red Army were transferred to the position of labor armies for use in the field of economic construction. The Council of Workers and Peasants' Defense was transformed into the Council of Labor and Defense, SRT. To help him, the State Planning Commission, Gosplan, was established. History of the CPSU, B. Short Course, p. 229. The struggle for labor productivity was one of the sites of the most fierce class struggle, the struggle against parasites, idlers, deserters of labor. The introduction of universal labor service was planned by Lenin even in his program of socialist construction in the spring of 1918. The Constitution, Basic Law of the RSFSR, confirmed labor service. The slogan, "Who does not work, does not eat," has become an integral part of the Basic Law. The decree of the Council of People's Commissars of October 5, 1918 introduced universal labor service. Instead of previous certificates for non-labor elements, a workbook was introduced. Lenin in the early days of Soviet power, in a letter to Fyodor Dzerzhinsky, proposed the introduction of labor service as a measure to combat saboteurs and parasites by organizing special accounting. This measure he regarded as the first step towards the introduction of universal labor service. Lenin planned universal labor service for all citizens of both sexes from 16 to 55 years. As a first step towards universal labor service, it was planned to introduce consumer working and budget working books. To cleanse society of parasitic elements, from thieves, swindlers, hooligans, Lenin demanded a variety of measures of struggle, a broad initiative of the masses. To supply the Red Army and strengthen its fighting power, the party and the Soviet government took truly heroic measures. Armaments and uniforms of it required the intensive work of factories, workshops. The advanced workers, the best part of the poor and middle peasant masses, honest workers from the ranks of the old intelligentsia, worked tirelessly to strengthen the output of manufactured goods, to raise the work of transport, to give the heroic Red Army arms, footwear, clothing, equipment, bread, to organize a strong rear and to achieve victory over the White Guard gangs and interventionists. The will to win, the pathos of the heroic era was reflected in other areas of economic and cultural construction. Tens of thousands of workers, peasants, on the call of the Bolshevik Party and the Soviet government, gathered uniforms for the Red Army, prepared gifts for the wounded soldiers, witnessing their love and constant concern for valiant defenders. Tens of thousands of teachers, at the call of the party and the Soviet government, went to the barracks to teach illiterate Red Army men to read and write. The best representatives of the Soviet theater carried art to the Red Army, decorating the life of fighters, raising their cultural level. Lenin and Stalin, the Bolshevik Party, organizing the military defense of the gains of the socialist revolution, did not for a moment lose sight of the basic creative task. At the beginning of February 1920, the session of the All-Russian Central Executive Committee on the proposal of Lenin adopted a resolution on the development of a single economic plan based on electrification. The resolution said, along with the immediate, urgent and priority tasks for the organization of transport, the elimination of crises in fuel and food, in the fight against epidemics, the organization of disciplined armies of labor, for Soviet Russia for the first time it is possible to proceed to more systematic economic construction, to scientific development and consistent implementation of the state plan of the entire national economy. Taking into account the primary importance of electrification, assessing the importance of electrification for industry, agriculture, transport, VTS, IK decides, instruct the NKH, together with the People's Commissariat of Agriculture, to develop a construction project of network of power plants, Lenin, Collected Works, Volume XXVI, p. 169. A commission was set up to draft an electrification plan, GULRO, which presented its historic report to the 8th Congress of Soviets. In the first days of March 1920, at a Congress of Labor Cossacks, Lenin said, "We have directed all our forces to restore industry and are moving steadily in this new war, in which we are obsessed with the same victory that has been won so far. We instructed a commission of scientists and technicians to develop a plan for the electrification of Russia. This plan will give us the full opportunity to clearly imagine how within a few years all of Russia will be covered by a network of electric wires and will be restored not in the old way, but in a new way." Lenin, SOCH, Volume XXV, 62. In a letter to Jekers Hezhanovsky dated December 26, 1919, Lenin proposed to write an article on the use of peat resources in connection with electrification, to discuss this matter in the press and to propagate electrification. In this letter Lenin shows how practical questions of the struggle with the fuel famine must be posed and resolved, without missing the main prospect of socialist construction. March 14, 1920, Lenin in a letter to Khrushchevsky suggests wider, it is more popular to put propaganda of electrification. He proposes an article plan in which to show, illustrate the profitability and necessity of electrification for the restoration of transport, industry, agriculture. The IX Congress of the Party, March 1920, focused on the issues of a single economic plan, economic construction, the tasks of restoring industry and transport, destroyed by the interventionists and White Guards, electrification of the national economy. In his initial outline of the theses on the agrarian question, Lenin sets the task of socialist reconstruction of agricultural production and connects it with the electrification plan for the country. With this electrification plan, Lenin also connects the task of cultural uplift. Thus, in a speech at the Third All-Russian Congress of the RCYU, he said to the youth, "You face the task of economic revival of the whole country, reorganization, restoration in agriculture and industry on a modern technical basis that rests on modern science, technology, and electricity." He pointed out that illiterate people will not be able to electrify, and there is little one simple literacy. IBID, p. 389. We must learn and study again. At the same Congress, Lenin also indicates the approximate time, the time, not less than 10 years, necessary to complete the electrification plan, thereby determining the likely pace of progress. Lenin called the electrification plan of Russia the technical basis of the general plan for the national economy and put this task in direct connection with the complete rearmament of the national economy and with the building of communism. "If you do not transfer Russia to a different technique," he said, "a higher than before cannot be a speech about the restoration of the national economy and about communism. Communism is Soviet power plus the electrification of the whole country, for it is impossible to raise the industry without electrification." Lenin, Collected Works, Volume XXV, pages 490–491. Lenin attached great importance to the electrification plan as a positive program of construction. The National Economic Plan for the Restoration of Industry, Transport and Agriculture, Lenin pointed out, should become the second party program. The program of the party must turn into a program of our economic construction, otherwise it is unfit. And as a party program, IBID, Volume XXVI, p. 45. A special role in this connection is given to the electrification plan, without which it was impossible to go on to actual economic construction. Economic work had its own difficulties, demanding for them to overcome persistence, great knowledge, confidence and victory. Lenin said, we must realize and remember that the war on the economic front will be more difficult and longer. In order to win on this front, it will be necessary to make more workers and peasants amateur, active and faithful. IBID, p. 34. The difficulty of this matter is that construction on such a huge scale begins for the first time, that the workers and peasants did not and do not have experience in this matter. Lenin and Stalin ruthlessly criticized any projections and chatter about the plan, in general. In response to scholastic empty talk, Lenin in his article, On a Unified Economic Plan, February 21, 1921, gave a profound explanation of the essence of the Galro Plan, proposing to study it, to enforce it. There is not and cannot be any other single economic plan, except for the Galro, already developed, Lenin wrote. It must be supplemented, developed further, corrected and applied to life on the basis of instructions from practical experience carefully studied. IBID, p. 173. At the 8th All-Russian Congress of Soviets on December 22, 29, 1920, Lenin's plan for the electrification of Russia was discussed and approved. The party, the working class, therefore, received the first scientific plan for economic construction. Here is what Comrade Stalin wrote in his letter to Lenin about the plan of Galro in March 1921. The last 3 days I had the opportunity to read the collection The Electrification Plan of Russia. The disease helped, there is no thin without good. An excellent, well-written book. Master's sketch is really a single and indeed state economic plan without quotes. The only modern Marxist attempt to bring economic backward Russia under the Soviet superstructure is really a real and the only possible under the current conditions of a technically productive base. Remember last year's plan of Trotsky, his theses Economic Revival of Russia on the basis of mass application to the wreckage of the pre-war labor industry of unqualified peasant and working masses, army labor. What poverty, what backwardness in comparison with the plan of Galro. Medieval handicraftsman, imagining himself an Ibsen hero, called to save Russia with the saga of the old. And what are the dozens of unified plans, appearing now and then in our press to shame us, children's babbling Peter or else Philistine realism, actually Manilovism, Rykov, still criticizing Galro and up to his ears stuck in the routine. My opinion. 1. Do not lose a single minute of chatter about the plan. 2. To begin an immediate practical attack on the case. 3. To this start must be at least 1/3 of our work, 2/3 will go to the current needs in transporting materials and men, restoring enterprises, distributing labor forces, the delivery of food, organizing supply bases and supply itself, and so forth. 4. Since Galro employees, with all the good qualities, still lack healthy practicality, it is felt in articles professorial impotence, it is imperative to pour into them a live commission of live practice people acting on the principle of delivering, fulfill by the deadline, etc. 5. To oblige Pravda, Izvestia, especially Econom Life, to popularize the electrification plan, both in the main and in specificities relating to individual regions, bearing in mind that there is only one single economic plan, this is an electrification plan, that all other plans, one chatter is empty and harmful. Lenin and Stalin, Collection of Works to Study the History of the CPSU, B, Volume 2, 1937. Pages 365, 366. This letter shows the complete unity of the views of Lenin and Stalin. Comrade Stalin developed in this letter a whole program of actions to implement the Leninist plan. What was the essence of the Galro plan? To give a red guiding thread for all creative economic activity, to build the basic force for the realization of a unified state plan for the national economy, the electrification plan of the RSFSR, 1920, p. 8. Electrification of the country was inextricably linked with the main task of building socialism in our country. In this plan, the common tasks of the dictatorship of the working class for the building of socialism were combined with everyday work to restore the economy of the country, to raise labor productivity and transition to new technology. The main tasks of the Gulru Plan were as follows. It was planned to build 30 district power stations with a total capacity of 1,750,000 kilowatts. On the basis of electrification, it was planned to launch a huge industrial construction. The metal was supposed to achieve in the next decade an increase in the smelting of pig iron by the factories of the South to 5 million tons. This is more than the entire 1913 smelting in all regions, 4.2 million tons. This increase can be achieved by the full use of equipment of existing plants, the expansion of those, among other things, Kerch, and the installation of a new large plant at 0.650-0.75 million tons near Alexandrovsk. The Urals can supply up to 2.5 million tons with additional supply of Donetsk and Kuznetsk coal, the central region up to 0.40 million tons and the north one with the same amount. To service Siberia, the metallurgical industry in the Kuznetsk basin should be developed. Cast iron smelting should be carried out in the nearest time up to 8 million tons per year, and every effort should be made to further increase this rate. 10 years of Gulru, 1930, p. 75. The extraction of coal in the Donbass was planned to increase to 50 million tons. It was planned to increase peat extraction to 17 million tons per year. In addition, the plan provided for the development of the chemical industry and, first of all, the production of fertilizers, the introduction of electricity in agricultural production, the development of urban economy, etc. Lenin's electrification plan for Russia as the first outline of a single economic plan was a program of transition from war to peaceful construction and mobilization of the masses for the struggle for the restoration of the national economy.